We're going to talk about the template method now. This definitely involves polymorphism. And you'll require an abstract class. And typically, we're going to make a final method. And let's say that we want x to always be greater than 0. Be helpful with our error messages. But the way things are going to happen are totally different for each of the subclasses. So we don't know what the subclasses are actually going to do with x. We just know that for all of them, x has to be greater than 0. So what we'll add is another method. And don't break my rule. You can call this method whatever you want. Do foo is one thing. Java uses foo with a 0 or a 1 kind of thing. That's what they use internally for a lot of things. It's just something to indicate that this is related to the foo method. So it's going to extend parent. And we're going to have to add a protected typically. So an abstract method says, hey child, you deal with it. Just make it x times 2. So this child is going to do x times 2. We'll make another one. And we'll have it do x times 3. And we'll make a main. Okay. So we've got our variables, child and other child. We're going to call run, passing in child or other child, and 10. And we're just going to do print out the foo. And we'll run it. And I ran the wrong program. Okay, so we'll run this. And you can actually hear Terry in the background there, scratching a scratchy post. So we get 20 and 30, right? So child returned x times 2, so 10 times 2, and other child returned x times 3, so that's working. Right? So when we call foo, it looks at the compiler, the static type looks at parent and says, do you have a foo method? And it does. And then at runtime, it says you're pointing at either a child or other child, so it goes to the appropriate class and says, do you have a foo method? No, I don't. Look up in parent. There's foo method, we call it. It first checks to see if x is less than 0 or less than or equal to 0. If it does, there's an exception. Otherwise, it calls do foo. And again, it looks to see in the other child or the child, do you have a do foo method? Yes, I do, so it calls that one. Regular polymorphism, nothing special. So how is it a template method? Well, the template is check to see if it's less than or equal to 0. If it is, throw the exception. Otherwise, do whatever the work is. Right? That's the template. They all work the same way. So if we pass in 0 here, it blows up. Pass in 10, it's fine. Pass in minus 10. Prints at 20, then blows up. Right? What this does is it frees the child from having to do all of the verification. This will only ever get called if x has got past the value before it. So it doesn't need to do the checking in here. Because there's no possible way in a properly debugged program for this value to be less than or equal to 0. Not possible. So the template method is there to give you the ability to do common validation typically, or any common work. It could be we always have to open up the database. We need to do whatever with the database, and then we need to close the database, right? Every single time. So that's we don't have to duplicate the open the database code everywhere. We don't have to remember before we call foo to open up the database. Foo is responsible for opening up the database. It's a way to ensure that you don't make mistakes. Every method has to, every time we do any of these methods in the child classes, they all have to behave the same basic way, and they do their own specific work here. There we go.